Let's start off here in Tampa. We have a Tea Party activist. Please identify yourself and ask your question.
Ted Wendler, First Coast Tea Party, Jacksonville, Florida. My question, how will you convince senior citizens that Social Security and Medicare need to be changed and get their vote?
Good question. Let me begin with Michele Bachmann, Congresswoman. How do you do that? How do you go ahead and change, reform Social Security, Medicare, while at the same time getting votes?
Well, one thing that we need to let senior citizens know is for those who are currently on the Social Security system, the United States government made a promise to senior citizens, and we have to keep that promise to them. But we also need to know that for those who are not yet on the system simply has to be reformed in order for it to work. The same goes with Medicare. We know that President Obama stole over $500 billion out of Medicare to switch it over to Obamacare. We also know that Medicare Hospital Trust Fund will be bankrupt within 9 years. These are programs that need to be saved to serve people, and in their current form they can't. So we need to have someone who understands these programs, who understands the solutions to these programs. I'm a person that's had feet in the private sector and a foot in the federal government. I've been there long enough to know the problems, but not long enough to become a part of the system. I know what to do, and I have the core of conviction to be able to make the changes that senior citizens can count on.
Congresswoman Bachmann, what about you?
Well, I think that the principle has to change because for years politicians have run on the idea that government is going to buy people more stuff, and that the federal government would be taking care of people's prescription drugs, their retirement, their health care, their housing, their food. We're the everybody else that's paying for the freight for all of these things. That's the principle that has to change, because we have to now recognize that going forward, this isn't going to work anymore. We have to be an ownership society where individual responsibility, personal responsibility, once again becomes the animating American principle, and we can't be ashamed of that.
All right. Thank you. Congresswoman Bachmann, you know that Governor Perry has suggested that Ben Bernanke, the head of the Federal Reserve, potentially should be tried for treason for what he's doing. Do you agree?
Well, as President of the United States, I would not be reappointing Ben Bernanke, but I want to say this. During the bailout, the $700 billion bailout, I worked behind the scenes against the bailout because one thing that I saw from the Federal Reserve, the Enabling Act legislation is written so broadly that quite literally Congress has given the Federal Reserve almost unlimited power over the economy. That has to change. They can no longer have that power. Why? Because what we saw with all of the $700 billion bailout is that the Federal Reserve opened its discount window and was making loans to private American businesses. And not only that, they were making loans to foreign governments. This cannot be. The Federal Reserve has a lot to answer for, and that's why it's important that they're not only audited, but they have got to be shrunk back down to such a tight leash that they're going to squeak.
It's one thing to say you wouldn't reappoint him, Ben Bernanke, to be head of the Federal Reserve. It's another thing, do you agree or disagree with Governor Perry that potentially he's engaged in treason?
Well, that's for Governor Perry to make that decision. My opinion is I would not reappoint Ben Bernanke.
Congresswoman Bachmann, do you have a problem with anything that Governor Perry just said? You're a mom.
I'm a mom, and I'm a mom of 3 children. And to have innocent little 12-year-old girls be forced to have a government injection through an executive order is just flat out wrong. That should never be done. That's a violation of a liberty interest. That's little girls who have a negative reaction to this potentially dangerous drug don't get a mulligan. They don't get a do-over. The parents don't get a do-over. That's why I fought so hard in Washington, D.C. against President Obama and Obamacare. President Obama, in a stunning, shocking level of power now, just recently told all private insurance companies, you must offer the morning after abortion pill because I said so, and it must be free of charge. That same level coming through executive orders and through government dictates is wrong. And that's why, again, we have to have someone who's absolutely committed to the repeal of Obamacare, and I am. I won't rest until it's repealed.
Governor Perry respond. Was what you signed into law, that vaccine for 11 and 12-year-old girls, was that, as some of your critics have suggested, a mandate?
No, sir, it wasn't. It was very clear. It had an opt-out. And at the end of the day, this was about trying to stop a cancer and giving the parental option to opt out of that. And at the end of the day, you may criticize me about the way that I went about it, but at the end of the day, I am always going to err on the side of life. And that's what this was really all about for me.
Senator Santorum, go ahead.
Can I add to that, Wolf? Can I add to that?
Hold on one second. First Congresswoman Bachmann, then Senator Santorum.
I just wanted to add that we cannot forget that in the midst of this executive order, there was a big drug company that made millions of dollars because of this mandate. We can't deny that.
What are you suggesting?
What I'm saying is that it's wrong for a drug company, because the governor's former chief of staff was the chief lobbyist for this drug company. The drug company gave thousands of dollars in political donations to the governor, and this is just flat out wrong. Right. The question is it about life, or was it about millions of dollars and potentially billions for a drug company?
All right, I'll let Senator Santorum hold off for a second. You got to respond to that.
Yes, sir. The company was Merck, and it was a $5,000 contribution that I had received from them. I raised about $30 million. And if you're saying that I can be bought for $5,000, I'm offended.
I'm offended for all the little girls and the parents that didn't have a choice. That's what I'm offended for.
Congressman Bachmann, go ahead and weigh in on this hypothetical 30-year-old who needs 6 months of intensive care, has no insurance.
Well, first of all, what I want to say, with all due respect to the governors, I've read this health care bill. I've been fighting this fight the last couple of years. President Obama's Obamacare bill. And waivers and executive orders won't cut it. If you could solve Obamacare with an executive order, any president could do it, and any president could undo it. That's not how it can be done. Plus, no state has the constitutional right to force a person as a condition of citizenship to buy a product or service against their will. It's unconstitutional, whether it's the state government or whether it's the federal government. The only way to eradicate Obamacare is to pull it out by the root and branch, to fully repeal it. It's the only way we're going to get rid of it. And this is why I'm running for the presidency of the United States, because 2012 is it. This is the election that's going to decide if we have socialized medicine in this country or not. This is it. Why? I just have to say this. It's because President Obama embedded $105,464 million in Obamacare in post-dated checks to implement this bill. We are never going to get rid of it unless we have a president committed to getting rid of it. And if you believe that states can have it and that it's constitutional, you're not committed. If you've implemented this in your state, you're not committed. I'm committed to repealing Obamacare.
Thank you. Congresswoman Bachmann, is that basically the DREAM Act that President Obama wants as well?
Yes, it's very similar. And I think that the American way is not to give taxpayers subsidized benefits to people who've broken our laws, who are here in the United States illegally. That is not the American way. Because the immigration system in the United States worked very, very well up until the mid-1960s when liberal members of Congress changed the immigration laws. What works is to have people come into the United States with a little bit of money in their pocket legally with sponsors, so that if anything happens to them, they don't fall back on the taxpayers to take care of them. And then they also have to agree to learn to speak the English language, learn American history and our Constitution. That's the American way.
I'm going to bring up the Bush tax cuts in 2001 and 2003, which went across the board, were not offset with spending cuts. And as a result, potentially, a lot of economists think the deficit went up and up and up.
Well, there's a reason why the deficit went up and up and up. When you have $1 trillion worth of spending that you don't pay for, it's going to go up. And now we're seeing again that the president wants to do more of the same. I was the leading voice in the wilderness of Washington all summer. I was one of the only people in Washington that said, do not raise the debt ceiling. Don't give the president of the United States another $2.4 trillion blank check. You've got to draw the line in the sand somewhere and say no more out-of-control spending. The president wanted to borrow money from countries like China to pay it back for a stimulus. We've got $1.2 trillion already that's been earned by American countries overseas. If we have a 0% tax rate, Wolf, we can bring that $1.2 trillion, it's called repatriation, bring that in. You'd have $1.2 trillion flooded into the system, then pass the free trade agreement so that we can move the economy, permanently lower the tax code. I'm a federal tax lawyer. I know how to do that. Repeal Dodd-Frank, repeal Obamacare. It really isn't that tough if you try. It's easy to turn around this economy. Just have the backbone to do it.